Yeah.
Welcome to our latest episode of the Lebanese Physicians Podcast. And today we will be discussing genetics in medicine and mostly immunogenetics. And our guest today is Dr. Cybel Mehawej. And the whole episode is co-hosted by Dr. MohammadAli Jardaly. Dr. Mehawej actually has completed her PhD in genetics at Paris Descartes University. And then after she had graduated from St. Joseph University, after which she actually went to Boston Children's Hospital and to Harvard Medical School, where she completed training in immunogenetics as postdoctoral training. Subsequently, she moved back to Beirut in 2017, initially joined Université Saint-Joseph, and subsequently in 2020 moved to the LAU School of Medicine. Cybel, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for hosting me.
So, Cybel, just as the reason we invited you to this is because you have actually recently discovered a second gene for your group regarding primary immunodeficiencies. But first, I want to talk to you about. Can you talk to us a bit about genetics and its relationship to disease and other factors?
Sure. Our work focuses on genetic diseases, as you mentioned. So usually genetic diseases are diseases that are due to some alterations or some abnormalities in one of our genes. And again, to just remind the audience, we know that in order for our body to function well, it needs instructions. So our body reads the genome or the DNA that is available for each of the cells, nucleated cells in our body, that provides instructions to these cells to function well. By reading this DNA, our body is able to produce proteins, and these proteins will be able to fulfill functions, and basically our body will be able to function well. In some cases, we have some we call mutations or genetic aberrations. So if we consider our DNA like a library filled with books that the body would read to produce a protein, to produce some recipes, then a genetic mutation or aberration would be like comparable to a typing error in a book. So this way, when our body will read this recipe to make this protein or this cake or this meal, it will produce it in a wrong way, or it will be unable to produce it. And therefore, the function will be altered. And depending on the gene, where it's expressed, what function it should fulfill, then the patient who has this defect in this specific gene would have this mutation. So to give examples, if this recipe is important to produce the cake, then our body will be able to prepare the whole meal, but the cake would not have a good taste, let's say. So if the gene is important for the functioning of the heart, then the patient would have some heart disease. If the gene is important for the normal functioning of the immune system, then the patient will suffer from defects in his immune system and in the immune responses. And depending on the gene, we would have different clinical manifestations, of course, and also on the severity. So some diseases can be somehow mild, other can be extremely severe and can lead to the early death of a patient. So this is it in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this. And
that's great. That's great to hear. Honestly, okay. So honestly, I don't know much about genetics. So in preparation for today's episode, I asked ChatGPT, and he said you are a trailblazer geneticist. And it's not every day that people discover genes, and you've discovered two related to the same condition. So congratulations, I guess.
ChatGPT is updated.
Yeah.
I didn't know
if ChatGPT is impressed.
Well, in the field of immunogenetics, I contributed to two gene discoveries at the LAU. During my prior studies, also in PhD, I contributed to the discovery of a gene involved in a lethal skeletal dysplasia, and that was also featured in Nature Arabia magazine. So for our recent discoveries for the team of human genetics at the Lebanese American University, so these are related, as you mentioned, to immune diseases. They are two different genes. Each is involved in a different entity of the what you call primary immunodeficiencies or inborn errors of immunity. So if you want me to talk more about these diseases or about the genes, I can, of course,
I would say, actually, I would like to know, like for example, I saw some of them are patient presentations and just how like the patient presented to you, how they sought your team, and then how you decided to do the genetic, like the process of gene discovery, I guess. How did it happen from the presentation of the patient to discovering the gene, for example?
Sure, of course. So our team at the Department of Human Genetics, led by Dr. Megarbane and also my colleague, Dr. Eliane Choueiri, are known in the field of human genetics, basically nationally, regionally, and also internationally. So in Lebanon, we get referrals from several physicians who see patients and suspect that a genetic disease may be basically present in a family. And this is based on several, if you want, criteria. Can be that different members in the family are affected, or the presentation of the disease suggests that it may have genetic cause. In that case, the physician would refer the patients to our department for us to perform appropriate testing, genetic testing. And basically now with the advances in technologies, we are able to read all the DNA of a patient, if you want, or the genome through what we call next generation sequencing approaches. So our team is known to have the expertise to do such studies, very advanced studies and such analysis, in order for us to try to identify the cause of the disease of the patient. So it starts from the first part, if you want, with the aim to establish an appropriate diagnosis. So to detect the cause of the disease in this family, and therefore to identify the disease in this family. And this is very important, first to know, to establish the diagnosis, to know what is the disease in the family. And second, this may guide the clinical management of the patient. And third, we believe that also it may help the family, because when we know the disease, we would be able to provide the family with appropriate genetic counseling to help them understand what happened in their family, what are the risks for future pregnancies, etc. So because internationally, out of the 20,000 genes that are present in our genome, only around 5,000 are known to be linked to diseases to date. So there are many genes that are not discovered, if you want, yet. So whenever we do a test and it turns out to be negative, in that case, we are not able to establish a diagnosis, but this does not rule out the presence of a genetic disease in the family, because maybe there is a gene, but the gene is not known yet. So in that case, we start to basically carry out our research in order for us to investigate more, to try to work more, to be able to really identify the novel, if you want, genetic cause for the disease, to identify, to characterize this novel disease. And in terms of research, we have different research interests in the group. So Dr. Megarbane is known to be very interested in malformations and neurodevelopmental disorders. Dr. Choueiri focuses on hearing impairment. And my research interest is basically in the field of immunogenetics, and also particularly in the primary immunodeficiencies. And we are also lucky to be in an institution that supports us. So we each of us has also projects that are funded by the president intramural funds. So because we are fortunate to have such also grants, we are able to perform advanced research studies and fund these research to do all the additional tests that are needed for us to be able to identify, if you want, what we call first as a candidate gene. So potentially can be involved in the disease, but then try to do additional studies to really validate it and really establish this link and say and publish that we have a new gene discovery, we have a new genetic disease that was identified by this Lebanese gene.
That's great to hear. But I'm interested, like Khalil, in learning about like how the referral works, right? So for those subset of patients that you discovered the gene, who was their primary physician? Was it an ENT
depending
doctor?
on the cases. Depending on the cases, we receive referrals from different, if you want, kind of physicians. We have many pediatricians who refer to us. Now, for particularly the two cases, the first case basically wasn't really directly referred by a physician. So the first POLD3 deficiency discovery was based on a family from Tripoli, consanguineous, so basically from a related marriage. And basically parents have heard about Dr. Andre Megarbane, who's very well known as a clinical geneticist. So they came directly to seek the help of Dr. Megarbane for the first family. They had lost 3 kids to the very severe combined immunodeficiencies at very early ages. So at 3 years old and 5 years old. And we worked on the proband who's still alive, luckily, alhamdulillah, who's 5 years old. And this family basically welcomed recently a healthy baby boy who doesn't suffer from any basically immune deficiency. So that was for the first family. For the second family,
so you see patients in clinic? You have like a clinic and they come and see you?
Yes, sure. Dr. Megarbane is a clinical geneticist. So he's an MD and he holds a PhD degree. So he has his clinic at LAU Medical Centers, of course. And he sees the patients, he does the clinical basically evaluation, investigation. And then Dr. Choueiri and I perform the, if you want, genetic test as, as PhD holders. So we are in charge of doing the experiments, validating them, basically, etc. For the second case, because you asked also about refers, for the recent discovery, which is the endophyllin A2 deficiency, the new gene that we just published. So that was a work done on a patient who was referred by Dr. Rula Farah from the LAU Medical Center. This patient was hospitalized and is still receiving his treatment at our medical center. So Dr. Farah contacted us also. She knew about this also. She refers the patients to our department when she suspects the genetic disease. And also in that case, she knew about the fund that can cover and help this family to get this test done. So that was for the second gene discovery. So really depending on the disease, on the cases, on the families, where do they come from? Because unfortunately, patients, not all patients can afford genetic tests because they are expensive, especially after the economic crisis. And many of the patients who suffer from these conditions basically live in rural area where we have more, prevalence of consanguineous unions. So, and unfortunately, they do not have all the possibility to be referred to us. So also one of our duties as a genetic department is to raise awareness about these diseases among physicians, but also in the general population. That's why 2 years ago, our department launched for the first time the rare disease event in Lebanon. And we've done this for 2 years, and it's going to be so the trend for the coming years, as internationally we are kind of celebrating this day to really raise awareness about these diseases.
Cybel, since you mentioned rare disease, how do you define a rare disease? Because typically we all say, or clinicians, we say this is a rare disease, but how do we, there's a definition for it, a genetic definition for it.
Sure.
So
Exactly. So we consider a disease to be rare when it affects 1 in 2,000 individuals or less than 1 in 2,000. So a disease is a really rare disease. So many would say, why do you focus on such diseases? Because they are really rare. I want to highlight the fact that a disease is rare, but the number of rare diseases is not that rare, because to date, around 7,500 rare diseases are known, and there are many more to be discovered. And most of these diseases, more than 70% of these diseases, are basically caused by genetic mutations. So they are genetic diseases. So if I want to give you an example, in Lebanon, we estimate that around 200,000 patients are affected with a rare disease. And also, because I mentioned the importance of studying these rare diseases, I want to say that it's, of course, to serve these patients and their families, but also to serve science and the knowledge, because when we discover a new gene and we try to understand how this defect in this gene is linked to a disease, this is how we really, scientists, understand the normal functioning of our organism. And based on many new gene discoveries in the field of immunology, for instance, scientists have understood how there is kind of regulation of the immune system. And now we have many of the cancer therapies that are based on the modulation of the immune system. So immunotherapies.
Right, right.
I want to take a step back. We talked a lot about like rare diseases and like gene discovery, which is honestly like fascinating. But if we look at the bigger picture, can you tell us more about like the landscape of genetics in Lebanon in general? I know in the US there are a lot of like commercial kits, do it yourself at home. What's available in Lebanon?
Yeah. So in terms of genetic testing in Lebanon, when we talk about genetic testing, we have to differentiate between what we call germline testing, or in other words, genetic testing for the sake of inherited or genetic diseases that are, if you want, caused by mutations that are present in all our cells, versus cancer genetics or oncogenetics, which is studying the genetic profile of tumors, because this is also very important nowadays. And the medicine, especially in the field of oncology, is based on the profiling, of the genetic profiling of cancer cells. So in terms of, I would focus. In terms of cancer testing, there are some centers performing cancer or oncogenetic testing in Lebanon, and many are outsourcing these tests to commercial companies abroad. In terms of, if you want, germline testing or testing for the diagnosis of the rare diseases that we spoke about, there are few centers that do these tests, and many hospitals do still outsource these tests for commercial companies, especially when we talk about the next generation sequencing approaches that I spoke about initially, where we are able to read all the DNA or the genome in a patient and try to find this link. And this is really challenging because these tests generate a massive amount of data. And the interpretation of this data can be very critical in order for the geneticist to really try to identify the disease-causing mutation among the 200,000 variants detected by some applications. So we always say as geneticists that finding the disease-causing mutation is comparable to finding the needle in the middle of the haystack. So I would say that I'm proud to say that at the Department of Human Genetics, we are doing these kind of analysis in-house, and this is this is a rare thing, let's say, in Lebanon.
Yep.
Amazing.
And I'm going to ask you now about, so for example, why, like, people may ask you, like, why do you have to discover this gene for the immunodeficiency on your patient? But what's the importance of discovering the gene in terms of like prognosis and treatment down the road?
So I would say that first, I really am very passionate about gene discovery in general, about linking genes to phenotypes. But the field of immunogenetics is extremely fascinating to me. And I'm very happy to be working, to be basically performing research in this particular field, because I feel that these immune diseases provide a wonderful example of how detecting the genetic cause of the disease would really help the patient. Honestly, I worked on skeletal dysplasia during my PhD work, and we were able to detect the cause of the disease in 2 Lebanese families, which is the magma gene also that we published. However, unfortunately, the patient died because the gene causes skeletal malformations that are not reversible, etc. In the field of immunogenetics, what is particularly very interesting is that many of the immune diseases can be cured when we really identify their cause. So depending on the genetic cause of the immunodeficiency, some patients would receive, for example, immunoglobulin replacement therapy for their whole life. And these are patients who suffer, for example, from primary antibody deficiency, such as the patient who is reported in our latest study, while others would require a bone marrow transplant to be able to survive and have a normal life. And also recent advances in the field of immunogenetics enable scientists to implement what we call targeted therapies. So when they detected a gene that is involved particularly in examples such as autoimmune disease and immune dysregulation diseases, they, for example, understood that when this mechanism is overactivated, this would lead to this immune dysregulation. So scientists were able to basically discover molecules that would inhibit such pathway, and this helped in the management of patients with many immune dysregulation diseases. So this is in terms of clinical management. In terms of prognosis, as you mentioned, which is a part of the clinical management, of course, when you know that your patient does not have a primary for example, a primary antibody deficiency, but this disease makes him more prone to have autoimmune manifestations or immune dysregulation, such as the example of patients suffering from what we call common variable immunodeficiencies. This way, you can estimate the prognosis and take appropriate measures to prevent the occurrence of such manifestations. And third, in the family, is very identifying the genetic cause of the disease and the diagnosis is very important, because this will help us geneticists to provide the family with appropriate genetic counseling, to explain to the family what causes the disease in their case, what is the risk for future pregnancies, and in some cases when the disease is very severe, for instance, patients have the ability to benefit from advanced approaches such as what we call PGD or pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, so they can, so they can have the chance to have healthy babies.
That's really fascinating to hear, honestly. And I want to learn more about you, about how you worked with like other physicians, because I think you also worked with like the ENT doctors and the pediatrician to develop like the hearing test and all of that. So can you talk about like how you collaborate with like other healthcare providers and how that's linked to the genetic discovery?
Sure, because you mentioned hearing impairment. So also our team was also fortunate to have another genetic breakthrough linked to the POLD3 gene that we first discovered in a patient from a severe combined immunodeficiency, because I mentioned that Dr. Choueiri's research interest is basically related to hearing impairment. So also we investigated the whole family of the patient who was initially, if you want, reported by us, and noticed that parents who were carriers for the mutation at the heterozygous state, the POLD3 mutations, had hearing impairment. So by investigating all the family members and doing additional work, also in collaboration with other scientists in Sheffield University, we were able to also validate the involvement of this POLD3 gene in hearing impairment. But this wouldn't have been possible without the collaboration with also physicians from also our medical centers who are co-authors with us on the POLD3 paper linked to hearing impairments. And I want to acknowledge them as well, Dr. Rami Saade and Dr. Rana Baraki. And it's actually, it's the collaboration that is key in our field. And in all, I believe, scientific, in all the scientific work and all the research, and particularly in the field of genetic diseases, because we receive patients with, one patient with one disease can have different manifestations. And it's the multidisciplinary approach that is very important. First, before the research, to provide the patient with the appropriate care, with the best care possible, and also to understand what's happening with this patient, and then to perform more research and try to really further discover and identify new things. So it's definitely the collaboration between us as the geneticists, between the referring physicians, but also between other scientists nationally, but also internationally. We do have several collaborations with international teams at Harvard Medical School, Sheffield University. We have with Cincinnati. We have with many teams in France. In the Arab countries also, we do have collaborations with Dubai, with Qatar, with Saudi Arabia. So we believe that by joining efforts, we are able to produce more impactful research.
Right, and you guys have been able to produce a very impactful research indeed. I mean, with all the discovery that you've done, and also, I mean, I think it was a great episode. We learned about the importance of gene testing, gene discovery, and potentially what it will provide people down the road. I think it's a very exciting time at this time. And also, I think, as you said, collaborations are very important, especially in the rare diseases, because obviously you're not going to have enough of them in Lebanon, and that's why you need other places in that case. And the other thing that impresses me, I was talking to MohammadAli offline too, and with you maybe, is you are doing all of this in Lebanon right now with the current situation the country is going in. But that shows, I think, the resilience of the Lebanese people and their love for life and maybe their love for science and learning. Thank you, Cybel, for being on the podcast, and hopefully we'll meet you soon.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting me and basically hosting the Department of Human Genetics at LAU. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we're going to break a record with ChatGPT next year when you discovered another gene, and we're going to have you on again.
Sure, we do have actually one that's going to be published hopefully in the coming 5 months. It's still confidential. It's in the field of hearing impairment, inshallah, very soon.
Nice. We can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you.